Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Daled. Thank you for everybody for a great siyum yesterday, and everything's up online now. So if you want to watch the siyum, hopefully by later today there'll be the regular siyum page with each section cut up by today or tomorrow. But you can already see it. It's actually a little confusing this time because the Daf post went up already a few days ago. So you'll go back a few days and you'll see Kiddushin 82, and there is the video of the siyum. And like I said, in a day or two, it'll be up on its own siyum page. There's a page, by the way, if anyone wants to know, in case you don't know, there's a page with you can find all the siyums. Basically, there's siyum pages, and each section is cut up into parts. Okay, we will start our learning today. Masechet Bava Kamma is sponsored by the Futornik family in loving memory of their fathers and grandfathers, Philip Kaufman and David Futornik. Today's stuff is sponsored by Goldie Gilad. Thank you, Rabbanit, Mishna, and the entire Hadran family for your unwavering support during Avi's hospitalization and rehabilitation. It meant so much to us. Avi is now ready to volunteer to do fruit and vegetable picking wherever they need him, and also in honor of the people of Israel who daily give their lives to our country. Today's stuff is sponsored by Julie Mendelson and Kathy Friedman for Refuah Shlema for Yoni Bernstein, Yonatan Shimshon Ben Aliza Bina. All your friends in Zichron Yaakov and Am Yisrael are praying for your full and quick recovery. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf now. So our main topic for the first section of today, we basically have two sections. The first is going to be dealing with Rav and Shmuel. So there's a study guide. I highly recommend using it. It charts out the different possibilities and the issues that are going on. Plus, it kind of shows questions and answers in a particular structure. If you're new to these study guides, so they're color-coded and font-coded, which means that since the Gemara is made up of Tanaitic material, quotes from Psukim, so the Psukim are in one color and font, the Tanaitic material is in a different, and everything else is the Amoraim, which are the rabbis of the time of the Gemara, or perhaps Sforaim came a little bit later. In fact, it's possible, right, the beginning of our Masechet, like many other Masechtot, are Sforaitic. Anyway, now we're going to get into Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel have a very basic debate here. We saw two basic debates yesterday. One has to do with bor itself, that we're going to get to much more today. Also, we're going to see highlights of a lot of things we're going to see throughout the Masechet. But what we're dealing with today is the word mav'e in our Mishna. So we said shur, bor, mav'e, hever, and we said it was a bit of a literary thing going on here, and perhaps that's why they use this very ambiguous word mav'e, which not only are we going to see what we already saw yesterday, which different psukim where it could be meaning teeth, eating, and it could mean a person damaging. We're going to see later today that it could mean two other potentially totally other things. But right now we're going to focus on Rav and Shmuel's interpretation, which is Shmuel says it's shein, it's the animal eating while the animal eats. And the other is Rav, who says it's adam, it's a person who damages. So now we brought each one the pasuk, then we said, actually, grammatically, syntactically, it doesn't really fit according to either. We're going to have a problem. To which the Gemara then said, well, michte, I'm going to just start from 6 lines from the bottom of Daf Gimel Amud Bet. Michte kra lo kamardaki v'lo kamardaki. Already, it doesn't really fit according to him, and it doesn't really fit according to him. So Rav my time alo Amar Shmuel. Now, if we started with why did Rav hold like Shmuel, and he said, well, that's because the way the word appears in the pasuk, it doesn't seem, the way the pasuk proves, it doesn't really seem like this is what it is. Then Shmuel did the same to Rav, and then we were left with, kind of knocking out why they each didn't hold like the other, because each one's argument could be thrown back at them. So now they want a different reason. And now for a while, we're going to deal with just this one question of Rav, why didn't he ask like Shmuel? Why didn't he say like Shmuel? Then once we finally resolve, what we're going to do is like this. If Rav doesn't hold like Shmuel because of something, then we're going to have to say, well, Shmuel, what's your response? And until we get to through the first half of Amud Aleph today, it's going to just be what does Shmuel respond to Rav? And we're going to have two different interpretations of how Shmuel is going to respond to Rav. In the end, we're going to reject one and go with a different. We're going to have two basic views of how Shmuel works in the Mishna. Then we're going to eventually get to, okay, Shmuel, why don't you hold like Rav? So we're in the first one now. Rav, why don't you hold like Shmuel? So they say very simply, Tana shur v'chomi le dishul. The Mishnah says shur. Obviously, if Shmuel is going to say that mav'e is a shur eating, then you're going to have to say shur is some other part of shur. But why would you have shur, like two different damages that your ox does, separated from each other in two different terms? It doesn't make any sense. So basically, Rav says, obviously shur means all things, which is what? Keren, shein, and regel that we saw yesterday. And now we're going to see, we saw that Braita, where there's a Braita that says these are the three. We actually saw it also on Daf Bet. The Braita says these are the three avod of shur. And basically, the way we're going to read our Mishnah now, according to Rav, is shur is really three, and then we have the other three: bor, adam, and a bor, a pit, a person who damages, and the fire. So shur really is three, according to Rav. And then it doesn't make any sense to say that mav'e would be also a damage that an ox causes, or any property of a person would cause. So Shmuel nami hatani le shur. So yeah, that's a pretty good argument. So Shmuel, what are you going to say about that? So this is what I said. We're going to have two different ways of how Shmuel is going to read the Mishnah. Not only do we have to figure out what is shur, if mav'e means by eating, then what is shur? It's either going to be keren or regel or both. Now, it's not going to be both, because it doesn't make sense that shur means two types and mav'e means one type. So we're going to say it's either regel or it's keren. And for that, that's the difference between Rav Yehuda and Rava. And then the obvious question, according to each of those explanations, is going to be, well, why did he leave off the other one? Okay. So that's where we're going to go. That's number one we're going to have to deal with. Number two, we're going to have to deal with, if you remember, when we read the Mishnah, the second line of the Mishnah really wasn't clear. The Mishnah reads, let's go back to Daf Bet. There's four avot nizikin, shor, bor, mav'e, hever. Okay, by this point, you should be knowing this in your sleep. Next, lo harei hashor karei mav'e, velo harei mav'e karei hashor. The shor is not like mav'e. Mav'e is not like shor, meaning really, we couldn't have learned one from the other, and that's why they're each listed separately. And then it says, and lo zeh v'zeh sheyesh b'hem ruach hayim, and those two, by the way, shor and mav'e, both have life in them, which is different than eish that has no life. And all three of those are dekan le'lech u'la'azik, they typically damage, and they're not like bor that doesn't typically damage. And then they say, I'm just reviewing all this because we're going to get back to all these words later. Hatzara shaveh sheben, what's the common denominator? Darkan la'azik, they generally do damage. Shmiratan alecha, you're responsible to watch over them. And kshezik chava mazik l'shalem tishlamei nezek b'mitava aretz, and then when they damage, you have to pay from the best of your property. So now one main important thing was missing from this Mishnah. Well, it said, the shor and mav'e are similar, that they have life to them, and the fire doesn't have life, and those are similar because But when it said the shor is not like the mav'e, and the mav'e is not like the shor, they didn't say in what way. So now we're going to have to also, once we plug in for Shmuel what he says shor is, and what he says mav'e is, then we're going to have to figure out, well, what's the lo harei zeh karei zeh? Why are they different, and why couldn't you have learned one from the other? So that's going to depend on whether you plug in keren or you plug in regel to shor. So I'm Rav Yehuda, Tana shor lekarno, mav'e l'shino. Okay, and this is why I charted this all out. It'll make it a little bit easier for you if you use the study guide. Shor is keren, mav'e is shame. So shor is goring, right? And that's different from shame. Obviously, we'll get to later, well, where's regel? But that's only going to be at the end. First, we need to explain, once we plug in shor is keren, is goring, right, with the horns, and mav'e is tooth, is eating, then you're going to have to explain the following. What is the next line? Why is this not like this? And why couldn't you have learned one from the other? V'hachi kamar. Now, the structure we're going to do here is going to be a little confusing, because they're going to give a certain logic, and then it's not the most convincing logic, and that's exactly what the Gemara is going to say. It would be the opposite of what you're saying according to this. So it doesn't really make so much sense, but I'll try to explain it anyway. Lo re'i hakeren she'en hana'ah lehezeko k're'i shen she'yesh hana'ah lehezeko. Keren, goring, is not like shane. In what way is it not like shane? Well, shane you benefit from, right? The animal benefits, and we talked about perhaps the owner benefits. And keren, there's no benefit. The animal just, right, does a vicious, violent act, but he doesn't benefit, right? There's no benefit to the body of the animal from that. Well, okay, the problem is, what they are trying to say is, keren is not like shane, meaning if you only had shur, you wouldn't have been able to learn shane, okay? You wouldn't have been able to learn mav'e. Now, if you only had keren, and we'd say, well, the reason you have to pay is because you didn't enjoy anything, and you have to pay, then you wouldn't have been able to learn shane where you do actually benefit. Now, it should be the opposite based on the logic we saw yesterday. Yesterday, we said that having benefited from something is all the more reason you should actually pay for damages. So the logic doesn't work here, but they're not going to actually question this logic. They're going to question the next logic, but they're all going to be intertwined. Below re'i shane, if you just had shane, it's not like keren. Why? because ein kavanato lazik. You're responsible even though you didn't intend to do any damages. Okay, now lekiriyah keren shekavanato lazik. Right. Well, Karen, you actually have intent to damage. So again, there's some sort of logic here that maybe we only make you liable when you didn't intend to damage, but maybe you'd be less liable if you did intend to damage, and therefore we couldn't have learned one from the other, and that's why each one needs to be listed separately. To which the Gemara says, what kind of logic are you talking about there? Lav kal v'chomer, which should be the opposite. Umashen, right? If you think about the difference between manslaughter and premeditated murder, right? You're obviously more responsible when it was premeditated and you really wanted to kill the person. So the lav kal v'chomer hu umashen she'en kavanato lazik chayav. Now it's a little different. Manslaughter, and it's a little different. Okay, it's not the best example, but Shane, you just wanted to eat. You weren't even trying to cause damages. So if you're responsible when you weren't even trying to cause damages, Karen shekavanato lazik lo kol shekain, when you intended to cause damage, of course you're going to be more responsible. So the whole logic doesn't make any sense. To which they try to give some explanation to the logic, but they're going to immediately reject this logic. To which they're going to say, well, what they thought originally was this. Now, Eved and Amma, okay, this is a very interesting halacha. We'll see why this is in a few minutes. If I own an ox, right, we already said my ox damages I'm liable to pay. In that same note, you would think that if I owned slaves, Canaanite slaves, which we already learned become my property, okay, anyone who learned Kiddushin or the Masechta before, we've been learning about this a lot, then the Eved Knani, as much as that's difficult for us to swallow, they were considered the property of the owner. Now, if your Eved or Amma, your maidservant or your slave, who's a Canaanite slave, who's part of your household, who is technically your possession, they damage someone else intentionally, you're not liable to pay. You're exempt. It's a little bit strange. Okay, you would think you would be liable. Well, the Eved can't be liable because they don't have their own money. They're your property. Okay, and likewise, by the way, you might not like this, but women also didn't own property in those days. So the Mishna, where it talks about the Eved, it also says Isha, a wife. So if the wife causes damage, she doesn't have to pay because she doesn't have her own money. And the husband doesn't have to pay either. So in the end, nobody pays, which is a very strange thing. But what they want, in a minute, we'll see why. But right now, what they want to say the following. If you want to say that it's obviously more severe if you have intent to damage, and all the more so you'd be liable, well, Eved and Amma will prove that that's not true. Because there could be intent to damage. The Eved or Amma could cause damage, and you won't be liable. So there you see. Okay, so Eved v'Ama, even though they intend to damage and they did it intentionally, still you're exempt. So hachanami lo shna. So we could say the same thing here. That's shame. You don't have intent. Maybe when you don't have intent, you're more responsible because look at the Eved and Amma. They had intent and you're not responsible. So Amar Rav Oshaya says, what are you talking about? And this says in an explicit Mishna what the reason is. Isn't there a very big reason why? In other words, the reason they're exempt is not because they had intent to damage. Intent to damage would generally, of course, make you more responsible. Here, there's a unique exception to the rule, and I'll give you a good example from real life for this. Shema yaknitenu rabo. What could happen? If the Eved knew that if they damage my friend's property, I have to pay. Well, if an Eved gets angry, an Eved in general is subjugated to his master. He doesn't have a lot of freedom and flexibility. If he gets angry, he can't really do too much. But if he gets angry, what can he do? He can go damage someone else's property and make the owner pay a lot of money. And that's a great way to be vindictive against his master. So Shema Yeknitenu Rabov, his master gets him angry one day. He'll go make a fire in the neighbor's property. And he'll make his master pay 100 maneh every single day. Okay, so that's right. So I have a good example. Someone I know had a worker that they fired, and the worker was very upset, and they had a company car. And the next thing they knew, they got a bill before the woman returned the car. There was a bill for 4 tires were slashed. Okay, now how do you slash 4 tires? Right, the only way to do that is to go over those spots that where you're not supposed to go over, right? And then obviously, if you go forward and you ruin the first 2 tires, you could just go in reverse. So it wasn't like they did it accidentally. They must have intentionally gone over one of those spots and slashed all 4 tires to basically say in your face, right? So that's like a great example where you're responsible for someone else and therefore they could cause you a huge loss. So to protect the owners, right, this is, right, there's labor laws to protect the workers. This is the opposite, to protect the owners. So they basically said, and then it becomes this fascinating thing. If an eved or adon causes damage, or perhaps, I think there's a bit of a girsa difference, whether it's eved and amar or eved and isha, then if a woman does damages also, she could do the same thing to her husband, right? She could cause her husband to pay a lot of money. So to protect the husband, they basically said, right, they can't make them pay because they don't have their own money, but they also can't make the master pay because it's unfair. So that has absolutely nothing to do with this thing. So back to square one, this logic we just said, what lo harezeh karezeh and lo harezeh karezeh, doesn't make any sense. So therefore, they're going to flip it. Ela parechaki. This is what it really meant to say the Mishnah. Lo re'ia keren shekavanato lahazik ki re'ia shein she'en kavanato lahazik. It's the opposite. Keren, there's intent to damage. And therefore, you can't learn shein from keren because shein doesn't have intent to damage. V'lo re'ia shein. There's the exact opposite, and what we said made more logical sense is this, which is shein you benefit from, and therefore since you benefit all the more so you're going to be liable, but you can't necessarily learn keren where he just did it out of anger, but there was no benefit to the animal or no benefit to the owner, and therefore you would think that you wouldn't have to pay, and that's why each needs to be listed separately. So what we did so far is we took Rav Yehuda's explanation. We have one more part left, and that's when we're going to eventually reject this explanation. But we said that according to Rav Yehuda, shur is keren, okay, when you gore. And mav'e is shein. And why couldn't you learn one from the other? We just explained, because shur, the keren, there's intent to damage, and therefore you couldn't have learned shein. And shein, there's benefit to the animal or perhaps to the owner, as we said yesterday, and therefore we couldn't have learned keren where there is no benefit. So that's why you need each one to be listed separately. That we're good with. But now, regel man, shayre, but what? They just let regel out? In other words, we know there's shein, keren, and regel. What happened to regel? When the animal tramples. To which they say, jump ahead to another Mishnah. Keshehizik chav hamazik la tuye regel. Says when hizik chav hamazik, actually, I don't know why they say it's another. No, it's actually in our Mishnah. What I saw somewhere it said, but at the end of our Mishnah it says, and when they damage, the one who damages has to pay the best of their land. Why does it talk about someone who damages? It must be coming to include something else. What's it coming to include? Regel. Okay, that's not a really good explanation. But why would you just reference it? It's kind of alluded to in that last line there. You should just say it explicitly. So therefore, it doesn't really make sense, this explanation, and we're rejecting it because there's no reason to choose keren over regel. Okay, what we're going to see in the next section is the flip, which is instead of keren, put in regel, and then we're actually going to have a reason why keren was left out. Okay, and that's why the next explanation is actually going to be more, is going to work, and this one didn't. So again, what we dealt with is, according to Rav Yehuda, shul meant keren, but in the end, that doesn't really work because it makes no sense that regel would have been left out. Ella amarav. Okay, you can already start thinking about what's the difference between keren and shein and regel. You might not know yet, but we'll know by the end of this section. Ella amarav. Tana shul leraglo umav'e l'shino. So Rav is going to say, shur is regel and mav'e is shein. Again, just remember, I want to just make sure you have this all clear. Rav Yehuda and Rava, okay, Rav Yehuda is 2nd generation, Rava is 4th generation Amora. They're both coming to explain Shmuel, who's 1st generation Amora. We have Shmuel who said mav'e is shein, but he didn't go farther than that. He didn't explain what shur is then, and he didn't explain what's this line, lo harei shur karei mav'e, lo harei mav'e karei shur, which was left out in the Mishnah, what the differences are, right? Imagine if the Mishnah had told us shur is different from mav'e because of this, and mav'e is different from shur because of that, then it would have been very clear what mav'e was. But the fact that it's missing makes it very unclear, and we don't have enough information to figure out what it is. So in the end, we had one explanation for Rav Yehuda, but it doesn't really work. So now we're going to try Rava, because in others, again, why doesn't it work? Because there's no reason to leave regel out. So now comes Rava, and he says the following. Shur is regel. Again, what does regel mean? Trampling. The animal walks, tramples on your field, and ruins your stuff, right? Or it doesn't, okay. tramples, and that's the damage they cause. Mav'e eats your food. The hachi kamma. Now, why is regel and chain different? Now, you would think regel and chain are pretty similar. Well, again, we saw these differences already yesterday. Lo re'i haregel, or maybe it was daf bet, I don't remember, but lo re'i haregel sheze kamatsui, kriya shein she'en eze kamatsui. It's very common that an animal tramples. That's what they do. They walk all around and they trample things. They don't pay attention. And therefore, shein, which is a little less common, right? The animal doesn't necessarily eat everything in sight. So perhaps if you just have regel, you wouldn't have known shein. Again, the more commonplace it is, the more responsible the owner is. And the shein, the animal benefits from, right? The animal doesn't get any benefit from the fact that they trample someone's property. They could care less. They probably don't even notice. But shein, they ate and they got benefits. So again, maybe you would think only if you get benefit, you have to pay damages. If you don't get benefit, you don't. So now this was a lot simpler than the previous because we didn't have a convoluted logic that didn't make sense and we had to reject it and redo it. We got it right from the beginning. But now the question is Karen my shire. So what? They left out Karen? Again, kshezik chava mazik, latuya Karen. When it says kshezik chava mazik, it seems to include some other case. What's it alluding to? Karen. To which the Gemara says, but why isn't Karen mentioned explicitly? Why is it only alluded to later? To which they finally have a good answer here. What's their answer? What's the difference between Karen and shein and regel? I'll say it outside before we read it inside. Karen, if you remember, we read in the Torah, there's shur tam and shur mu'ad. We don't expect that every animal is going to go and gore or attack some other animal or some other, break your vessels intentionally, right? With this anger kind of thing. But I always think of Ferdinand when I think that book Ferdinand, right? When he actually didn't even intend to, right? But he goes crazy. And anyway, but animals in general, they're not so evil that they're always trying to go out and attack other people. But yes, they trample and yes, they eat because they want food and they'll just eat anything. And they'll trample things because they just won't pay attention. So therefore, when it comes to regel and shein, you're actually responsible for full damages immediately. But if you remember, when we read the verses about goring, it said it depends whether you've done this a few times or not. The Torah doesn't say exactly how many times. We'll get to all that inside. But the basic concept is until it's been proven that you've done it a few times, we call you a shur tam. We're not expecting you to do this kind of damage. And therefore, if you did, we're only going to make the owner pay half damages, not full damages. Only after it's been proven that you're a crazy animal, well, then basically we're going to assume that you are likely to do this and we'll make the owner responsible for full damages if they don't prevent you from doing it. So that leads us to why is Karen not mentioned in our Mishna? Because our Mishna is listing muadim mitchilatan kamare. Our Mishna is listing cases where already from the beginning you're forewarned. Okay, you can assume that your animal is going to eat at some point from someone else's property, and therefore your job is to prevent that from happening. You can assume that your animal is going to trample someone else's stuff. You have to check from the beginning. Okay, fire, boar, right? You don't think, oh, let me dig a pit and let me see. Let's see if a few people maybe won't fall in it, then maybe it's not so dangerous. No, of course. Anyone can fall in it once you dig the pit. Your fire can catch fire and spread. If you're, depending on what you say, mav'e is, okay, if you go with Rava, although Rav, which we're not in right now, we're in Shmuel. But again, Adam is mu'ad la'olam. But that's not relevant now because we're in Shmuel, who says that it's shein. So now, basically, we're going to say the Mishnah decided to list things where you're responsible from the beginning and not where only after a few times. Okay, so but tamim with the basaf muadin lo kamari, it wasn't listing those things that first you start out as a short time, you only pay half damages and only down the road. So therefore, that's why those were listed and not these, and that's why Karen doesn't belong in the Mishnah. Okay, that finally we finish our first section of today, which was Shmuel. Why didn't he hold like Rav? It's because shur was already mentioned. There was no reason to split shur into two, shur and mav'e, to which we had to say, well, Shmuel, how do you read it? We have Rabbi Yehuda, that it was Karen and shein. So that doesn't make any sense. Then we go to Rava, who says it's regel and shein, and now we explain why Karen doesn't belong on this list. Now we're going to do the reverse, which is Shmuel my time alo amar Rav. So why didn't Shmuel hold like Rav? Amar lecha, he would say, Isa kadata hadam haktani seifa shor mu'ab shor mazik b'rishut tanizak ve'ha'adam. In a later Mishnah, there's a list of a shur that's been forewarned, a shur that damages in your property. If a shur walks into your house, okay, I bring my dog to your house and my dog damages something, okay? I'm immediately responsible because, what was I doing bringing my dog into your house? And Adam. And Adam is always muad la'olam. Now notice here, that's where Adam is listed. You don't need Adam in this first Mishnah because it's listed later. But Litni Bereisha, well, still, why is it not in the beginning? Again, this is why Shmuel says, I don't believe like Rav that it's Adam because Adam is mentioned later. So then they say, why didn't it say it in the beginning? Because Shmuel is going to say that our Mishnah is only talking about, there's a lot of categories of damages. It's damages a person does, damages my property does. Well, our Mishnah was all, and in fact, it says so in the language. Mamon, right? It's shmiratan alecha. You're obligated to watch over these things, meaning it's all property related. These are all things that are your property. Again, property is a bit loose here, but there's your actual property, your shur, or anything else that you own. Then there's your bore, which isn't exactly your property, but it's something you dug and you're responsible for. Your fire, again, it's not your property, but you built the fire and therefore responsible for the damage it causes. So that is what the Mishnah is talking about. It's not talking about people causing their own damage. That's something else, and that's mentioned much later. So now we go back to Rav. Rav Nami, Hakatane Adam B'Seifa. Well, if Adam appears later, why does Adam appear here? It seems to be duplicated. There it's mentioning who's mu'ad from the beginning, and that's why it's telling us that Adam is in the category of mu'ad. You can't say, oh, I didn't know, right? This is classic. And right, I remember in my school, there were certain things. The first time you do it, you're not responsible. But the second time, you've been warned now, right? But when it comes to damages, there is no such thing. You're not allowed to damage from day one. And therefore, you can't claim, oh, I didn't realize, or I'm not, right? There's no such thing as mu'ad for Adam, for not mu'ad. Adam is always responsible no matter what. So now, what do we have to figure out according to Rav? My lo harei. What's the lo harei zeh kerei zeh? Okay, the shur is not like Adam. Hachi kamar. Lo re'iyah shur. Now, why couldn't you have learned shur from Adam? If your property is responsible, obviously you're going to be responsible if you do it yourself. Well, they say no, it might be different because shur shemishalem et hakofel. If you remember, we learned that if my ox kills kills a person, theoretically I should die because I caused the death of someone else. But since I didn't do it with my own hands, the Torah gives me a way out, which is I can pay a ransom. But if I kill someone myself, I can't pay a ransom. Okay, and not only that, but if I don't get the death penalty, I don't pay a ransom. Okay, there is no payment. So therefore, you might say, well, you can't learn shur has a ransom payment where I could, right, where I am obligated to pay, whereas that doesn't exist by Adam, and therefore you can't learn Adam from shur. And Lori Adam shaya b'arba advarim kirei shur she'en bo arba advarim. What are these arba advarim? It's really chamisha advarim, 5 things. If a person damages another human being, okay, not kills, but damages, they're liable for 5 things. Okay, we'll go through them very quickly, but we're going to see this all at the end of the Masechet, which is nezek, tzal, ripoy, shevet, v'boshet. Nezek are the damages. Tzal is the pain I caused the person. The ripoy are the doctor's bills. Nezek, tzal, ripoy, shevet is the now that you can't go to work, so your compensation payment for what you're not making, your salary, and boshet, the humiliation that I caused you. So basically, that only exists in a person who damages another person. But like if I punch you in the face and I break your arm, so I'm going to have to pay those damages. But if my shur did the exact same damage to you, broke your arm, I'd only be liable to pay damages. So that's a big stringency that exists in a person that doesn't exist in a shur, and therefore you couldn't have learned shur from Adam. And they say 4 and not 5 because the nezek is in both. So it's only the 4 extra things that you're responsible for as a person. Now, let's go back to the rest of the Mishnah. Let's make sure this fits in with Rav, who says again, shur is regel, keren regel and shein, right? All types of damages of an ox or an animal, my property, and mav'e is Adam. So after it said this is not like this and this is not like that, which we just filled in right now. By the way, it's all charted out how to read this line according to Rav Yehuda's explanation of Shmuel, according to Rava's explanation of Shmuel, and according to Rav. So now, what's the tzad hafesh? That they're typically damaging. Okay, well, wait a minute. V'chishur darko la'azik. Now, it is darko la'azik when you talk about shein and regel. Those are commonplace. But it's not so commonplace. That's the whole reason why the shur muad and shur tam. It's not commonplace for an animal to go goring somebody else. So they say b'muad, what it must be talking about is when it's muad, after it's been forewarned, it's done a few times, then it's typical. Okay, muad or kolazik, really? A muad is typically does hit? Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what muad is. Since it's already done it a few times, we assume, yes, it's typically going to injure. Okay, what about Adam? Adam dar kol azik. Remember, it said what's commonplace about it, right? What's similar, the common denominator between all these things, including mav'e, which is Adam, is what? Humans generally damage? Is that a typical, right? This is a good philosophical debate, right? Are people inherently bad or inherently good, right? People, would you say that most human beings just go attacking other people? Not really. To which the answer be Yashem. Well, when you're sleeping, you don't really have control over what's going on. And it might be much more commonplace for you to break things, right? If you have a vessel right next, a jar right next to your bed, you might accidentally in the middle of the night break it. So then they say, Yashen dar kol azik. Really? You would say someone who's asleep is typical to damage? Yeah. Yes, because you're bent and you're this and you're kind of asleep, yeah, it does happen typically. So that's how we're going to explain that line. It's not exactly the most convincing argument. Now we have another problem with the Mishnah. If you're going to say it's Adam, the wording in the Mishnah, it says Ushmiratan alecha. Another thing about the common denominators, you're responsible to watch over them. Now, that means you're responsible to watch over your animal, your boar, your fire, not right. But not yourself. You would say you're responsible to watch over it when you're talking about yourself, right? Adam shmirat gufo alavhu. It's not someone else is responsible for you, which is the way the language sounds. No, it's you're responsible for yourself. So to answer this question, they're basically going to say, right, it's worded for someone else, but it really is referring to yourself. Because when you try to put a category of things together and you have to word it, it's sometimes hard to word it in a way that includes everything. But obviously it means not that you're responsible for something else, but you're responsible for yourself. Now that's what they're going to say now in a bit of a longer way. The way they're going to prove it is to say the following. Rav, you're trying to plug in mav'e is Adam. And you're trying to claim maybe the wording doesn't fit because it says you're responsible for it. What's it if not, right? It's not yourself, it's for something else. So wouldn't it be better to fill in your animals, right? When your animal eats, shame. So they say, well, according to what you're saying, haditane karna. Now we're going to see the karna, who, if I remember correctly, we lived in the same time as Rav and Shmuel, had a different version of our Mishna. And this is the way his version went. One of the four was Adam. There, it was explicit. It wasn't like, this is my explanation. That was his version. And it said, Ushmiratan alecha. Adam shmiraku fa'alafu. Obviously, right? It's not, Adam shmiraku fa'alafu. It's on himself, not on someone else. So, Elek da'amale Rabbi Yavau litana, Tnei Adam shmiraku fa'alaf. Hachanami, Tnei Adam shmiraku fa'alaf. Moving now to a bit, what we basically say is, when we explained it for Karna, it was explained that what it means is, yes, if it's your animal, you're responsible for the animal. If it's yourself, you're responsible to watch over yourself. So we'll say the same thing here for Rav. So basically we take how we explain Karna, bright Mishna, and we basically apply it to Rav. So what we've done so far is, why didn't Rav hold like Shmuel? And that's because the Mishnah doesn't make any sense. Why would shur be split into two? And then we had to explain why Shmuel thought so and how we read the Mishnah according to Shmuel. Then we said, why didn't Shmuel hold like Rav? And then we said, if that's a pretty good explanation, right? His whole thing was that, right now, forgetting what it was, right? Right, because Adam appears later in a different place. And then we had to say, how does Rav explain that? And then we had to say, how does Rav explain lo rizeh kirizeh? Exactly like we did with Shmuel. And we're now done. We've explained Rav, we've explained Shmuel. But now we're going to have a question on both of them, two questions. Based on the fact that we ended the last daf by saying the wording of the shoresh mav'e, as it appears in these other two places, one connected with teeth and one connected with a person, doesn't really fit so well. So why don't you say mav'e is water? So here you see the word tav'e, which is the same root, ba'e, bet, ayin, yud, with mayim. Water. So maybe it's damaging through water, right? I spill water on the street and then somebody slips in it. So they say, no. This is also a grammatical, syntactical problem. Miktiv mayim navu. Mayim is plural. Should have said mayim navu. Tav esh ktiv. Okay, first of all, the way it says mayim navu, it should be like water streams. And it should say it in plural. So it's all wrong. Tav'eh must be referring to fire. So matkif la Rav Zvi. So option number one is to say, forget Adam, forget Shane. Neither of those really work. Why don't we just say it's water? To which they said, you're wrong in thinking that word tav'eh, grammatically, it clearly doesn't go with mayim, it goes with esh, because it's singular. And tav'eh esh is, right, it says mayim tav'eh esh. So the question is, tav'eh referring back to the water, or is it referring to the fire? We thought it was the water. No, it's not that. So now Rav Zvi is going to say, okay, well, maybe ema mav'e ze ha'esh. And here we're going to have a lot of problems, because mav'e esh, what's the problem? Esh already appears in the Mishnah as hev'el. So what you're going to say, mav'e and hev'er are the same? Well, right? So first of all, they're going to say, why don't you say it's esh? Because kiktiv tav'eh be'eshu dichtiv. That would be the proof. And by the way, tav'eh and mav'e is the same syntax. Okay, it's much more similar than all the other ones that we saw before. So ihachi my hamav'e v'ha'ev'el. But then if it's 4 avot, shur, bor, mav'e, hev'er, mav'e is fire and hev'er is fire, that wouldn't make any sense. Now, this sometimes happens in a Mishnah, where it says that the second line is coming to explain the first line. So maybe hev'er is coming to explain, in case you didn't know what mav'e is, it's hev'er. The obvious problem, ihachi arba'a, shlosha havu. Well, then it would only be 3 avot nizikin, shur, bor, mav'e, hev'er, which is all one. Well, they're going to try still, but then they're going to end with a bunch of questions here and basically say, obviously, mav'e is not fire. Well, maybe you say shur is regel and shame, let's say, and that already counts as 2 separate ones. And then you have mav'e, which is adam, and then bor. Sorry, right. Shur would be 2. Right. Sorry, I just said it wrong. Shur would be 2. Bor would be 3. Mav'e would be, and hev'er would be 4. And that would be perfect. Ihachi, but then the wording of the rest of the Mishnah makes no sense, because what does the wording say? There's 2 problems with the continuation of the Mishnah. We already know mav'e and shur are similar in what way? Lo ze v'zeh sheyesh behem ruach chayim. They have life to them. Well, if they have life to them, it can't be a fire, right? They're not like, right? What does it say? And then the continuation, right? Eish my ruach chayim ibe. So first of all, you can't say mav'e is fire, because we just said mav'e and shur have life to them, and a fire doesn't have life. V'tu, my keharei ha'esh. And not only that, it says mav'e and shur are different from esh. So you can't say mav'e is hev'er. That makes no sense. So basically, we have these 2 kind of preposterous suggestions, but sort of trying to say, since your pasuk doesn't really work for Shane and the pasuk doesn't really work for Adam, maybe we would try a different pasuk where this tav'eh word appears. Maybe it means water, maybe it means fire, but we reject all that. Okay, so that was, I already reviewed now the whole beginning of our daf till now, which was really just this discussion of Rav and Shmuel. So from at the end, we're not going to go back to the beginning here, but now we're going to go to the second section of today's daf. Tane Rav Oshaya. We're now going to have 2 different, actually it should be Rabbi Oshaya. We're going to have 2 different lists. Our list in our Mishnah is 4 avot nizikin. Now we're going to see that Rabbi Oshaya had 13 and Rabbi Chiya had 24. And I recommend strongly that you look at the chart. Okay, the chart on the set at the end of the sheet is going to have the 4 that they all agree upon, then all the other 8 that Rabbi Oshaya is going to add, and then all the rest that Rabbi Chiya is going to add. Okay, and then on the side, you're going to have why these are different, like what the differences are between each one, which is going to come up in the context of how each one is going to like, why didn't he add those? Because, well, his list was only talking about those, and that's in a different category. And basically, we're going to categorize the different sections to see why this one included that and this one didn't include that. Tani Rabbi Oshaya, Shlosha Asar Avot Nizikin. There's 13. Shomer Chinam v'Hashoel. I think I said it wrong. It's 9 more. Sorry, I don't know why I said 8. I had 8 in my head, but it's not. It's 9. Shlosha Asar Avot Nizikin. So there's 13. Shomer Chinam v'Hashoel Nosei Sachar v'Sochel. Okay, these are shomrim. We're going to get to this in Bava Mitzvah. Now, this is a very interesting question. Are shomrim, these are people who are watching your item and then something happens to it. Now, really, when we think of shomrim, we think of responsibility. We don't think of damages, right? But on the other hand, damage was caused to your item that I was watching and I didn't watch it properly. So to a certain extent, it's similar to shur, where I didn't watch my animal properly and it damaged. This is a little different because I didn't watch your item properly and it got damaged, okay? Because I wasn't doing a good enough job. Again, we'll get to all the details of what you're responsible for, and which these are 4 different types of shomrim. I'm not going to get into all of them right now because we just don't have time, but we'll get to all that, not to worry. So these are 4 types of shomrim that are each responsible for different levels of damages. So according to Rabbi Oshaya, these fall under damages. Next, nezek tzar lipoy shevet v'boshet. Well, that's another 5, right? That's how we got to 9, 4, and 5. So these are the 5 types of damages you're responsible for if you inflict this damage on a person, right? They now have to pay doctor bills. They now can't go to work. That's all considered separate types of damages. And arba adamat nitin hatle sarin. 4 in our Mishnah, that gets you to 13. V'tana didam my time alotana ha'ani. So now we're going to say, why didn't our Mishnah hold by these? Well, bishlama l'Shmuel. Shmuel is very easy. What did we say about Shmuel? Beniske, because he doesn't say mav'e adam. So beniske mamam kamayre, beniske gufa lo kamayre. Shmuel said we're only talking about damage that your property causes, not damage that you cause. And the shomrim is you caused the damage because you weren't responsible enough. And the 5 types of things, you caused the damage because you damaged, right? You caused damage to someone. But the 4 in our Mishnah are things that your property damaged, or like we said, it's not exactly your property, your bore, your fire, but it's something that you created that now caused damage to someone else, but not you directly. Ela Rav litne, but Rav, who said that mav'e is Adam, he should have listed then all these things. To which she says very simply, Tane Adam, b'chol milei da Adam. It was included in Adam. Mav'e means Adam. What does Adam mean if not shomrim and nezikin? Okay. Ula Rabbi Oshaya nami. So now back to Rabbi Oshaya. Hatani le Adam. Well, if you hold by Rav, then why didn't you just say these are all included in that one? And why do you have to list them as separate items? So trey gavne Adam. So again, assuming if Rav Oshaya held like Rav, then you would say the following: Tane Adam da azik Adam, v'tane Adam da azik shur. What's the difference? Well, there's Adam who damages another person, and there's Adam who damages a shur. So the Adam Mazik, the 5 things, are a person who damages a person. Our Mishnah, when it talked about Adam, now we're saying that when Rav said Adam, he must have meant Adam who damages someone's property. Now, ihachi shur nami litne trei gavne shur. If you're going to distinguish between a person who damages property and a person who damages a person, well, then why don't you distinguish when a shur damages a person and a shur damages property? Instead, we stuck it all in one word, shur. So, hi, well, let's see. Bishlama Adam da azik shur nezeku da mishalem. Adam da azik, Adam mishalem arba advarim. Ela shur, mali shur da azik shur, mali shur da azik Adam. Idi v'idi nezeku da mishalem. It was a long line. I'm sorry, I didn't stop in the middle. But basically what they're saying is the following. Adam, who's mazik Adam, has a different law than Adam mazik property. A person who damages your property, you just pay damages. A person who inflicts damage on a person has to pay these 5 things. Nezek, salary, push, heaven, and boshet, we talked about before. But if a shur attacks your property, or a shur attacks, whether it's your property, it could be an animal of yours, and a shur attacks a person, no matter what, you only pay damages. You don't pay those other 4 things. So therefore, there's no reason to list them separately. V'ha shomer chinam. Well, okay, now, what did we say? Adam, according to Rabbi Oshaya, if mav'e is Adam, then Adam includes Adam hamazik property, right, that damages property, and the extra ones he added, like the nezer tzar v'poy shevet v'boshet, is a person who inflicts damages on a person. But what's the problem? Shomer chinam, shoel nosei sachar v'asocher, which he also added, is Adam da azik shorhu. That's a person who damages property, right? I basically was watching your item and I didn't watch it properly and something happened to it. So vikatane, and yet it's in the list. So if you're saying that's why, right, shouldn't that have been included in Adam? To which they say, well, it's 2 different types of damages. Tane hazeka to be Adam, but tane hazeka to be mav'e. When it says mav'e, it means Adam, it means I damage your property by my hands. I broke it, I smashed it, I did something to it. Then that's Adam, that's mav'e. The shomrim is it got into my property, right, in a permitted way. I didn't do anything wrong. And then what happened? Well, I didn't watch it properly and damage happened to it, not because I did it directly. And that's why those are listed separately. So we've now managed to explain, number 1, why our Mishnah doesn't mention the ones that Rabbi Oshaya did. Again, according to Shmuel, because our Mishnah only is talking about my property, okay, not a person. That's very easy. According to Rav, we said it was because, I just have to remember, right. The Mishnah was talking about Adam shemizik property. And these others are talking about Adam shemizik Adam, or Adam where it's mizik property, but not by anything I did directly. Okay, now, Tani Rabbi Chiya. Now we get to Rabbi Chiya, which we're not going to finish the discussion on him today. We'll just get started with it. Esrim va'arba avot nizikin. Tashlumei kefal v'tashlumei arba v'chamisha v'ganav v'gazlan. These 4 all in one category. It's all theft or some type of armed robbery. And then there's theft where regular gneva where I stole and then I go to court and I admit that I stole and then I just have to return the lost item. I don't have to pay the double payment because that's what we call a knas, a fine. But if I get caught, then I actually have to pay double. And if it was an animal that I stole and I slaughtered, then I have to pay 4 or 5, depending whether it's a small animal or a large animal. We'll get to all that much later in our Masechet. Ve'edim zomimim. This is someone who lies in court and makes someone else pay based on their lie, and then gets caught before they actually made the person pay. Ha'ones v'mefater motzi shem ra. This is all back to. Right, by the way, we'll get to edim zomimim in makot. And ones mefater motzi shem ra, we've discussed that all in nashim, right? This is someone who rapes, someone who seduces, and someone who claims his wife wasn't a virgin. And they were all, right, that was a lie. And the ones mefater, right, they defiled this woman and her family, therefore they have to pay. So these are all, by the way, they're all in the category we're going to call knas. It's a fine. It's not like there's actual damages done, although with a woman you could say there's damages done, but that's not, what you're really paying here is a fine because the Torah gave it a set amount. It's a certain amount. It's not like depending on the situation. If I take your truma and I make it impure, I ruined it for you. And if I take, that's mitameh. Midameh is I took your truma and I mixed it up with non-truma stuff. And now nobody knows which is the chul and which is the truma. And menasech is I took your wine and I offered it up to avodah zarah, to idols. And therefore it's now no longer, you can't benefit from it. Okay. All these things are problematic, right? I ruined it for you. Those are also in the list. V'hanei tleisar, and obviously the 13 from before. So ha'esrim v'arba, that's how we get to 24. So Rabbi Oshaya ma'atam lo tanehai. So why didn't Rabbi Oshaya say these? So the first answer is b'mamona kamayre b'knasa lo kamayre. If you notice, I said a lot of these are fines. So he get rid of all the ones that are considered fines because he was only talking about financial compensation as opposed to a fine. So that gets rid of all those. But which ones are still left? Well, ganav v'gazlan demamona hu litne. So ganav and gazlan, it's really you're paying back what you stole. And it's not, right? That's compensation. That's not a fine. Litny, it should be listed then. Well, hakatane le shomer chinam v'shoel. Shomer chinam and the shoel are liable for theft also. If it was stolen from your property, you're liable. So therefore, it didn't need to list them separately. That's why Rav Oshaya didn't have those. Rabbi Chiya nami hatane le shomer chinam v'shoel. So then why did Rabbi Chiya list them separately? And we'll end with this answer, and then we'll continue with this discussion tomorrow. Tane mamona da'ati liyadi behetera v'katane mamona da'ati liyadi b'isura. There's 2 types of ways that mammon gets into your property. One mammon gets stolen from you. Now, there's one is the property, it got into your property in a permissive manner, which is, you gave me your thing to watch and then it got stolen, or the other way is I stole it from you. Those are 2 totally different things, and therefore you have to list them separately. So Rav Oshaya didn't think so, but Rabbi Chiya did. So what we had so far in this section was, is it 4? Is it 13? Is it 24? Which ones are listed and why? Why does each one disagree with the other? And you can see from the chart the different categories that they're all in. Wishing everybody a good day, and we'll meet up tomorrow.